Despite the fact that virtually anything could be used for currency, throughout human history, we've been seen to have been rather keen on the use of metallic currencies, um, partly for their commodity value, but also as a pure fiat currency as well. So the first use of metal as a form of payment begins to appear around 2800 BCE, when the Sumerians start to standardize the weights of silver that will be used in payments. In general, other goods at the time were quoted either as being priced in silver or priced in barley. It's not entirely clear where the use of silver emerges from or why it starts to be used as a reference asset. Some anthropologists believe that it may be because of its particular chemical properties and its popularity when trying to mine for tin. But nonetheless, we do see silver being used as currency as early as 2800 BC. Now, something that may make access to Bronze Age writings a little bit more accessible is to understand the exchange rate between units of currency which haven't been in use for thousands of years. And this would be the original shekel, which was a mass of barley, not simply the modern Israeli change. They also used a mina, which was seen as being 60 shekels, and a talent, which was in turn 60 mina. The reason for this is that the Sumerians used a base 60, a base 12 and 60 number system. So each of their physical units of account was a fraction of 60, such that there would be 3,600 shekels per talent. And you'll frequently see the notion of wealth associated in talents of silver throughout the ancient world. So it's useful to have some idea about what we're talking about. Approximately, a talent weighs roughly 30 kilograms, but the specific mass definition of a talent does change throughout the Bronze Age. So it's important that we know whether we're talking about Greek talents, Assyrian talents, etc. But since this is not an anthropology course, I'll spare you that level of detail. Now, it's worth noting, of course, that the use of silver as a currency does have complications, because assaying silver, which is to say testing its chemical purity, is in fact quite expensive. To give you some idea about the relative expense of assaying silver, we see that losses of as much as 5% can occur in medieval assaying techniques, let alone what was available during the Bronze Age. Nonetheless, despite the complications associated with verifying the purity of silver, it does appear to be in widespread use as a way of effectuating payments for literally thousands of years. Now, if you'd like to be able to have some notion about the value of a mina or a shekel of silver, it's worth noting that in Assyria, roughly 2,000 years after silver began being used, that an entire month's wages in Assyria was anywhere from 1 to 4 shekels of silver, meaning that you would have to work several months as a worker in order to collect even a single mina of silver. For the best paid employees, this might take as much as an entire year to earn a mina of silver, making a talent of silver a lifetime's wages, quite frankly. Now, metallic tokens begin to appear at the far eastern end of Eurasia around 1200 BCE with the advent of what we call spade and knife money that you can see up here at the top of the screen. Spade and knife money was named such because these base metal tokens were actually shaped like shovels or spades or knives. And the notion was that they could be the metal in them could be melted down to recreate these tools. So this was not any kind of fiat currency that had value because people said it had value. This spade and knife money had value because you could actually just re-smelt the metal, fairly base metal, even in a backyard furnace effectively, and use that to convert money into tools, or in reverse, convert tools into money if you had the ability to actually make the right kind of markings. Now, we see the use of metallic currency in China going back well into the Shang dynasty. In fact, in Goetzmann's book, he talks about the discovery of Fu Hao's tomb, in which metal cowrie shells were discovered, presumably to be used as currency in the afterlife to pay for armies. Now, of course, we do eventually get around to using precious metals, in particular coins made of silver and gold. What we see here at the top of the screen are ancient coins from the Kingdom of Lydia, in which now Turkey. At the far western end of modern Turkey, in what was then known as Ionian Greece, the king of Lydia happened to discover that there were very significant deposits of gold and silver in rivers. And so he had an alloy called electrum, which was a mix of gold and silver forged into coins individually by hand. Because gold and silver was so plentiful, it was made available to common people to use as a form of payment, not simply in terms of exchanging masses of silver, but of exchanging fixed coins that bore the agio, or the symbol of the mint, upon it. Now, these kinds of coins are only practical to use if they carry a higher face value than their base commodity value in gold. If the base value of it in gold was, say, 10 bushels of wheat, but the face value is only 8 bushels of wheat, then everyone gathers up coins, melts them down, and pays in gold rather than coins. So the coins always need to have a higher face value necessarily than the metallic content would otherwise suggest. Now, the coinage technology, the idea of creating small portable metal tokens out of precious metals, not just out of base metals, but precious metals, spreads fairly quickly. It spreads first to the west into Greece, and then it spreads as well into Persia. The Persians adopt this, but not as widely as the Greeks do. And when the Macedonians, Alexander the Great, finally conquers the Persian Empire, there was a massive increase in the amount of gold and silver which was coined, because temples were broken into, and the historical hoards of gold and silver, which had underlaid various kinds of other commodity trades for centuries, were coined and used to pay Alexander's invading armies. Now, a significant improvement in the coinage technology emerges in China around 220 BCE, where we start to see cast coins being created as opposed to individual coins being globbed out onto a sheet and then hammered out individually by hand. Cast coins are dramatically faster and cheaper to produce and don't have the same kinds of problems that hammered coins do, in that it is much easier to detect fake when cast coins have consistent appearance, unlike hammered coins, which are all individually different. One final interesting point about the use of precious metal coins is that very frequently political symbols were put on them, whether this was the symbol of a city, the symbol of a kingdom, or perhaps even the image of a monarch themselves. And this became a powerful form of messaging. The idea was that the image of whoever appeared on the coin was providing economic stability and order under heaven, as it were. And therefore, it became a way of signaling to people from where does your comfort and your ability to transact derive. In that sense, it harkens back to ancient Sumerian temple banks that helped to coordinate ledger-based transactions thousands of years before. Interestingly, though, we can see that faces disappear from precious metal coins in the Middle East with the rise of Islam, which felt that graven images of individuals might lead to idolatry. And so instead, on Islamic gold coins from the Golden Age, we actually find Quranic verse as a form of authority rather than the face of an individual monarch. Now, of course, we can use metal to create fiat currencies. And in fact, ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian from the Han Dynasty, or writing during the Han Dynasty, suggested that metal cash coins, so popular and famous for anyone who's ever visited Asia, were created by the Zhou kings during the Eastern Zhou period. A modern estimate puts this between about 500 and 600 BCE, not long after Lydians started to create sort of standardized precious metal coins as well. But there's not a lot of indication that the Chinese learned this from the Lydians, despite the chronology of events. Rather, it seems to be an evolution from spade and knife money away from commodity-based monies that were valuable because of their metallic content, more towards a fiat currency, which has value because its issuer, the government, says that it does. In general, the Chinese economy at the time was sufficiently large that gold and silver was simply insufficiently plentiful for the kinds of transactions that needed to take place. Gold, or silver more appropriately, might have been fine for merchants to use in their relatively large transactions, but when it came to buying a bowl of noodles or buying a chicken, paying in silver was simply impossible and impractical. And so the ancient Zhou kings, according to Sima Qian, created money to facilitate transactions and to help the flow of goods throughout the country in order to prevent any sorts of famine. So this gives a very different kind of perspective on the source and use of money and its authority. These are the first kinds of fiat currencies that we observe, which don't have any kind of commodity value and really are only worthwhile because governments say they are. In the modern world, the way that governments ensure that we continue to use their fiat currencies is simply by stating that our tax obligations, which all individuals and corporations have to be remitted in the fiat currency that they have issued. Now, as a final consideration, it's worth noting that there are very serious inefficiencies associated with the use of metal as a currency. Metal, of course, can be clipped or sweated, which means that you can take a bag full of gold coins and shake it up, such that little tiny bits of it will break off as gold dust. And if you gather enough gold dust, you'll be able to remelt it down and make your own coins, which of course means that the coins you shook in the bag, each one weighs less than its original mass at the mint, which means that you are actually exchanging less gold or less silver. This is what we mean by sweating coins. When it comes to clipping coins, we actually mean snipping off tiny little fractions or shaving off little bits of gold or silver, and as such devaluing any kind of circulating currency. This is one of the reasons why you often see merchants weighing out currency in ancient art or in movies that are presenting ancient time periods, because people were familiar with the idea of clipping and sweating, and so it wasn't simply a matter of accepting a number of coins, but accepting payment as a mass of gold or silver, perhaps harkening back to the old Sumerian standard of shekels and minas and talents. Furthermore, there are limits to the amount of metal that's available to be used as currency. In general, we tend to want to use metal that is widely available as a fiat currency, but this still creates problems for us. For instance, ancient Chinese cash coins were typically made of bronze and copper, which of course could be used as well if combined with tin to make weapons. And this means that there were real problems with, say, paying for internationally imported goods using metal. More than once throughout China's history, the export of metal coins was banned by merchants, in a way to try to keep metal circulating within China, but without these kinds of important metals that could be used to make weapons and armor flowing to their rivals in the north or the south. Now, of course, the other big problem of using metal as your currency is that even if you do have enough metal to use as your currency, you can't use that metal for anything else, which means you can't be using it yourself to make weapons or electronics or anything else of that matter. We have tied up what could otherwise be a useful resource, simply keeping track of our exchange tokens. And so unsurprisingly, this led later in the Tang and Sung dynasties to the use of paper as money, which we'll be talking about next.